She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She didn't storm off the court or glare at the thousands of people chanting someone else's name. She just stood there, microphone in hand, in front of a stadium that was packed to its absolute limit, and she smiled. And what came out of her mouth next? Nobody in that arena saw it coming. Not the crowd. Not the commentators. Not even the player waiting in the tunnel. Because what Coco Gauff said in that moment wasn't what a world number 4 is supposed to say. It wasn't what a Grand Slam champion says. It was something quieter. Something far more dangerous. And by the time you finish watching this video, you're going to understand exactly why that single moment might be the most psychologically brilliant thing any athlete has done all year. Let's go back to February 18, 2026. Dubai. The Duty-Free Tennis Championships, one of the most prestigious stops on the WTA calendar. Center court. Coco Gauff had just come off the back of one of the grittiest matches of her season, a 3-set war against Elise Mertens where she saved 3 match points, dug down into something raw and fierce, and found a way to win. The kind of victory that reminds you why she's wearing a Grand Slam ring. Sweat still on her skin, adrenaline still flooding her system, she walked up to the microphone for her on-court interview. Standard procedure. You win, you talk, the crowd cheers, you walk off. Simple. Except nothing about this was simple. Because as Coco Gauff looked out at those stands, she already knew something that most people in that building hadn't quite admitted to themselves yet. This crowd? It wasn't here for her. And here is the thing you need to understand before we go any further, because this changes everything about what happened next. Dubai isn't just a tennis city. It is home to over 450,000 Filipino expatriates. That is more than 20% of the entire population of the city. And when Eala, 20 years old, electric, fearless, and already turning the tennis world upside down, entered the draw at this tournament, something happened that almost never happens in the early rounds of a WTA event. The stadium filled. Not at capacity, not close to capacity, filled. Flags everywhere. Chants echoing off the roof. A wall of noise so overwhelming it bled through the broadcast into living rooms thousands of miles away. And every single one of those voices was calling one name. And it wasn't Coco Gauff's. So what do you do in that moment? You're a world number 4. You've won the US Open. You've signed the endorsement deals. You've been on the magazine covers. You have every reason to feel like you are the story. And yet the crowd in front of you is treating you like the obstacle standing between them and the player they actually came to see. Most athletes crack under that kind of weight. Most will show the frustration even if it's subtle. A jaw clench, eyes that go cold, an answer so mechanical it says everything about how they really feel. But Coco Gauff grabbed that microphone and said something that stopped the crowd cold. She said, "I know you guys are probably here for Alex, so I'm sorry to make you wait." And then, she smiled. Let that sit with you for a second. A Grand Slam champion apologized to a crowd for winning her own match. But was it really an apology? Or was it something else entirely? Because here's what nobody was talking about in the moment. That line wasn't vulnerability. That line was a weapon. And the crowd didn't even realize it had just been disarmed. She added, "If I'm not mistaken, I think some of you guys are cheering for me, so I appreciate it a lot." One sentence of self-awareness. One sentence of gratitude. And just like that, the entire hostile dynamic in that arena shifted. She hadn't fought the crowd. She hadn't tried to win them over with force. She had simply acknowledged what was happening, laughed at it, and refused to be threatened by it. That was the first clue. The first signal. Coco Gauff had already decided how she was going to handle the Eala effect, and it wasn't the way anyone expected. Now fast forward exactly 24 hours. February 19, 2026. Same stadium. Same packed stands. Same ocean of Philippine flags. Except this time, Coco Gauff wasn't walking off the court. She was walking onto it. And standing across the net? Eala. The 20-year-old who had already taken down world number 8 Jasmine Paolini in the previous round. The Rafa Nadal Academy product who had turned every single match on this tour into what felt like a home game. The crowd was already in full voice before the first ball was struck. "Let's go, Alex." Rhythmic. Relentless. filling every corner of that stadium. And what was Coco Gauff thinking as she bounced on her heels at the baseline, listening to thousands of people will her opponent to destroy her? Well, she told us afterward. And the answer is not what you think. The match lasted 67 minutes. Coco Gauff won 6-0, 6-2. It wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. It was a masterclass in something that goes so far beyond racket technique or fitness or tactics that most sports analysts don't even have a name for it. It was a masterclass in psychological architecture, the ability to completely reframe the environment around you in real time so that what should be breaking you is actually building you up. But here's the part that no highlight reel will ever show you. Here's the detail that changes everything. It wasn't until afterward, when she grabbed that microphone again, that the full picture emerged. "I had a similar match at the French Open last year," she said, "so I brought that mindset today." And then she paused. And then she laughed. "Whenever you guys were cheering for Alex, I was pretending it was my name." So, think about what she just admitted. While 15,000 people were screaming for her opponent, Coco Gauff was standing on that court, hearing the crowd, and in her mind, she was the one they were cheering for. She converted hostility into energy. She took a psychological weapon aimed directly at her concentration and she turned it into rocket fuel. The crowd had no idea. Eala had no idea. The commentators calling the match had no idea. And that is exactly why it worked. Because if you can't beat the crowd, and you never can, then you absorb them. You make them yours. And you win anyway. Does that remind you of anyone? Think about Novak Djokovic. Think about the years he spent playing in stadiums where entire crowds worshipped Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Where Roger was the soundtrack to some of the biggest matches of his life. Where the hostility wasn't just in the stands, it was in the press conferences, in the narrative, in the way the sport talked about itself. And what did Djokovic do? He learned to feed off it. He learned to let the pressure make him heavier, more grounded, more dangerous. He turned every chant for his opponent into a chip on his shoulder that he wore like armor. Coco Gauff, at 21 years old, has just shown the world that she has learned the same trick. And that should terrify every player on the WTA Tour. But what she said next, this is where the story takes a turn that genuinely nobody saw coming. Because most athletes, when asked about a hostile crowd, give you the diplomatic non-answer. The fans were great. It's always tough on the road. I just tried to stay focused on my game. Hello. Forgettable. Coco Gauff did something entirely different. She looked into that microphone and she thanked Eala. Not sarcastically. Not with a smile that says the opposite of what the words mean. Genuinely. She said, "I'd like to thank Alex for bringing a new demographic to the sport. I really appreciate it." A world number 4 who had just spent 67 minutes being out-chanted in her own match, thanked her opponent for creating the conditions that made her feel like the villain. Who does that? Who is built like that? "I think it's great," she continued. "I know sometimes it's tough when you're playing against a home crowd, but I think that it's great for the sport. So keep being enthusiastic and keep rooting for your player." And the crowd, the very same crowd that had spent 2 hours chanting against her, erupted in applause. Think about the precision of that moment. She had just beaten their player. She had just dismantled the person they had traveled from across the city, some from across the world, to cheer for. And instead of walking off triumphant, instead of letting the victory speak for itself, she turned around and told them that what they were doing mattered, that their passion was good for the game, that their loyalty to Eala was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. The crowd that had been her enemy for 67 minutes suddenly didn't know how to feel about her. And that confusion? That is exactly where Grace lives. I think she's taken it to the next level in terms of bringing a new demographic, Gauff had said before the match even began. Yeah, it's great for tennis overall. Here is a player who, before stepping onto the court against someone turning the sport upside down, already understood the bigger picture. Most players would resent being cast as the villain. Most would feel the unfairness of playing what should be a neutral match on what was essentially the other player's home turf. Most would complain. Maybe not publicly, but you'd feel it in their body language, in their press conference answers, in the tightness around their eyes when a journalist mentions the crowd. But Coco Gauff looked at 450,000 Filipino fans and saw something completely different. She saw new eyeballs. She saw new energy. She saw a sport that was growing, and she understood that she was part of that growth, even when she was the one being booed. Now here is where you need to know the numbers, because the numbers make this story even bigger than it first appears. Over 450,000 Filipino expatriates in Dubai alone. Over 700,000 across the UAE as a whole. And in 2026, the list of tournaments where Eala has drawn record or near-record crowd energy keeps growing: Melbourne, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Indian Wells. She is not a trending moment. She is not a viral flash in the pan. She is a movement. And the players who figure out how to coexist with that movement, who learn to play in front of any crowd, for any team, in any atmosphere, those are the players who are going to thrive in the next chapter of this sport. Coco Gauff has already figured it out. The question is whether anyone else is watching closely enough to learn. And then came Indian Wells. March 9, 2026. The BNP Paribas Open. 3 weeks after Dubai, the same two players, the same packed stands, the same wall of Philippine flags, the same electricity in the air before the first ball was even struck. Except this time, the story had a completely different ending. And this is where things got complicated in a way that nobody had scripted. Eala came out sharp. Sharper than Dubai. Her game clicking in a way that felt different, more settled, more dangerous. The crowd was giving her everything, and for a change, it looked like everything might be enough. She raced through the first set. The chants grew louder. The momentum was unmistakably hers. And then, at 1-0 in the second set, with Eala already leading, Coco Gauff walked to the net. She held her arm. She had a brief conversation with the chair umpire. And then, quietly, she retired from the match. No drama. No controversy. No scene. Just two young athletes standing at the net in a stadium suddenly gone silent, figuring out what to say to each other. But here is the detail that nobody led with. Here is the moment that tells you everything you need to know about who Coco Gauff actually is underneath the ranking and the trophies and the endorsement deals. At that net, before anything else happened, before the crowd fully processed what was going on, Eala leaned in. And she said something to Gauff. The cameras didn't catch the words. The microphones didn't pick them up. But later, in her press conference, Coco Gauff told reporters exactly what was said. She just told me, "I hope you feel better," and things like that. A 20-year-old who had just been on the verge of the biggest win of her young career took the first seconds of that victory to check on the person she had beaten. That's not tennis. That is character. And then Gauff said something that stopped the room. I felt really bad to pull out. You never want to pull out, but more so for her. Because she was playing great tennis and I don't want to take anything away from the way that she was playing. Read that again. Coco Gauff, the woman who had been out-chanted, out-cheered, turned into the villain on her own sports stage, was in pain, had just been forced to end a match early because her arm was failing her, and her first instinct was to worry about whether her retirement would diminish Eala's achievement. Not her own ranking points. Not her own injury. Not what this meant for her season. Her first thought was about protecting the legitimacy of her opponent's win. I'd rather finish the match and lose 6-0, she admitted. But at that point, the pain was getting worse and I didn't know what was going on. I just felt it was better to stop. The highlight reels won't show you this moment. The stat sheets won't capture it. But it is the most important thing that happened in Indian Wells that day. And before she left that press conference, she made a prediction. She said, "I think she's going to have a great tournament." Genuine. Said by a player who had just been eliminated by injury and who had every emotional right to be focused entirely on herself. Instead, she left the room having endorsed her opponent's chances to anyone who would listen. And that prediction, about a young player who had been growing in front of the world's eyes, carried weight precisely because of who was saying it. Now let's pull back. Let's look at the full arc of what happened between February and March 2026, because when you see it all together, the picture it paints is extraordinary. In Dubai, Coco Gauff stood in a hostile environment, absorbed the noise, turned it into fuel, and won in 67 minutes. In the locker room in her head, she had reframed 15,000 people cheering against her into 15,000 people cheering for her, and played the match of her tournament. Then she stepped to the microphone and used the platform not to celebrate herself, but to celebrate the sport, to validate the crowd, to thank her opponent, to say, loudly and clearly, "This is good for all of us." And in Indian Wells, when injury made it physically impossible to continue, her first concern was whether walking off the court would cheapen the person she was walking away from. That is a complete human being. That is someone who has figured out something that very few athletes at any level have ever truly mastered: the ability to hold space for someone else's greatness without shrinking your own. Here's the larger truth that this entire story is pointing toward. The Eala effect is not going away. It is not a novelty. It is not a one-tournament storyline that will fade when the next big thing arrives. Every tournament she enters, the stands will fill with Filipino flags. Every match she plays, the chants will drown out everything else. And every player on the WTA Tour is going to have to make a choice at some point. Do you fight the crowd, or do you find a way to embrace it? Do you let the atmosphere become a weapon pointed at you, or do you pick it up and use it yourself? Coco Gauff has already answered that question. She answered it in 67 minutes in Dubai. She answered it in a press conference where she thanked the person turning her matches into away games. She answered it at a net in Indian Wells where she laid down the weight of her own pain to make sure someone else's achievement felt real and earned and legitimate. There is a reason legends outlast trends. There is a reason certain athletes build careers that survive every era, every rivalry, every shift in the sport's center of gravity. It is not always the most technically gifted. It is not always the one who hits the hardest or runs the fastest. Sometimes it is the one who can walk into a stadium full of people rooting against them, hear their name in every chant even when it isn't there, and walk off the court, whether they won or not, having made the moment bigger than just themselves. That is what Coco Gauff did in Dubai. That is what she did in Indian Wells. And that is what separates a great player from one who the sport will talk about for decades. She pretended the cheers were for her. And she won. She thanked her opponent for growing the game. And the crowd that had been against her gave her a standing ovation. She retired hurt. And she worried about making sure her opponent's achievements still felt real. 3 moments. 3 choices. All made under pressure. All made in public. All revealing the same thing about who Coco Gauff is: when the noise is deafening and the pressure is real, and the easiest thing in the world would be to break. She didn't break. She didn't argue with the umpire. She didn't glare at the flags. She smiled, she adapted, she acknowledged, and she left every room she walked into a little bit bigger than when she entered it. One match can change everything. That is what she said after Dubai. One match can change everything. And she is right. But what she may not have fully realized in that moment is that it wasn't just the match that changed things. It was the way she handled everything around the match. The interview before. The interview after. The press conference. The net moment in Indian Wells. The prediction. The thank you. Every single one of those choices added up to something that no ranking can measure and no trophy case can hold. It added up to a reputation. And in sport, a reputation built not on what you do when things are easy but on what you do when things are impossible. That is the kind of reputation that turns a champion into a legend. So here is the question that should be sitting in your mind right now. When the crowd is against you, when the noise is overwhelming and the flags belong to someone else and every chant is a reminder that you are not who they came to see, what do you do? Do you fight them? Do you shrink? Do you retreat into yourself and hope the pressure doesn't crack you? Or do you do what Coco Gauff did? Do you close your eyes for 1 second, hear the roar of that crowd, and decide, in that moment, in that stadium, in that match, that every single one of those voices is cheering for you? Because here is the thing nobody tells you about pressure. The crowd doesn't actually have the power. You give it the power. You decide what the noise means. And when you can stand in the middle of a hostile environment, reframe the entire reality around you, and perform at your absolute best anyway, that isn't just sports psychology. That is mastery. That is the kind of mental architecture that turns a good career into a great one, and a great career into something that gets remembered long after the final scoreboard goes dark. Coco Gauff didn't yell. She didn't argue. She smiled, and she turned the loudest room in tennis into her room. And that quiet, deliberate, almost invisible power move is going to be studied by coaches and athletes and psychologists for years to come. Not because it was dramatic, but because it worked. And because it revealed, in the most public way possible, that the future of women's tennis is going to belong not just to the players who can hit the hardest, but to the ones who can think the clearest when everything around them is screaming.